Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Valerie, you're up.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here this morning to talk about the economic valuation study. It's great to be in front of this group as a firm that focuses on the economics of natural resources. It's really wonderful to be able to present the findings and put some numbers around the work that you do, because so often natural resources are perceived as an intangible. And what we'll talk about today is how there are real and tangible benefits from an economic output standpoint from all the work that's happening in the CHNEP area. So I look forward to talking through this with you. Next slide, please. So just a refresher, the project objective here was to estimate the economic value of the natural resources in the CHNEP area, all 6,800 square miles of that. And it was within your fiscal year 2020 work plan, task 3.4, primarily funded by the EPA and with some local match. And the project was set up in 3 phases. So phase 1 was the community input data collection stage. Phase 2, the economic modeling itself. And then phase 3 is what we're doing here, talking about the final results. Next slide. So phase 1, you may recall, we were here in front of this committee many moons ago. We met with all of the committees and interviewed a lot of individual stakeholders as well as committee members through a series of structured interviews to really understand what you perceive and what stakeholders perceive as the revenue generating activities that come out of the natural resources in the CHNEP area. And really those focused on water, wildlife, and conservation lands. Next slide, please. So using that community input and collecting a lot of data, we then moved into the economic modeling, which I'll talk about next. Next slide. You've probably all seen economic impact models in the past. I'll just take a few seconds to talk about the process of economic impact modeling. So we used IMPLAN, which is an econometric modeling software package. It's an input-output model, and what this does is from the federal level, it takes the flows of trade throughout the entire economy and teases out how much the impact is of a particular activity on a particular jurisdiction. So if I spend $100 in Glades County, this generates multipliers that allows us to know how much of that stays in Glades County versus gets spent in Hendry County or somewhere else. And in addition, it really looks at, if I walk into a restaurant tonight and spend $100, I hand the restaurant owner $100. That restaurant owner then in turn may order bread from a baker. And that baker then in turn spends money but also pays his employees and provides payroll that's circulating throughout the economy, as does the restaurant owner. So those are our indirect, that business spending is that indirect, and then that payroll spending is that induced or offsite spending. And the multipliers allow us to estimate these and put a quantity on those. And then in addition, provide estimates of the tax impacts that are associated with these. Next slide, please. So I'll cut right to the chase. The numbers are significant. The recreational expenditures from people using the natural resources in the CHNEP area to go hiking, kayaking, hunting, and so forth generate about $11 billion per year in regional economic output. Now, it's a big number, and remember, it's a big area, 6,000 square miles, but it's a significant number. In addition, the restoration activities that you all carry out with your partners, as well as the research and education that goes with that, add another $10 million in output. Agricultural production on these lands generates about $2.5 billion a year, and then commercial fishing and aquaculture add another $25 million for a total of $13.6 billion per year. Now, real estate, which I'll talk about in a moment, we don't sell our real estate every single year, so those are asset values. They're not included in the economic impact model. But if they were converted to annual flows, they would have the equivalent impact of about $380 million a year in additional output for a total estimated economic impact of about $14 billion a year. So these are big numbers, and you can see that there is substantial value associated with these natural resources and with your activities to manage and conserve those. Next slide, please. So in the property impacts, we use a technique called hedonic modeling to estimate what these premiums might be that are associated with the natural resources. And I want to give you the analogy of a property that's on a major waterway. If you have a home that's on a major waterway and you were to pave over that waterway, the home would still have value. And so what we're teasing out is that difference from being near that major waterway or conservation land. And so we're able to do that using literature values from Florida studies to estimate how much these natural resources generate and amenity values to the properties in your area. Next slide, please. And what we found is that the results show more than $6.3 billion in property value impacts are generated by these natural resources. Now that's a big number. Again, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the total property values within the area. So even though it's a large number, it's a pool within a pool of really large numbers. And what this shows is the breakdown by basin. Within the report, we also have that by county. So the property value premiums here are broken out, and you'll see that every basin receives some value. Not every basin receives value from both major waterways and conservation lands, and that's partly because of the decision rules we used to not double count. So if you received one, we automatically didn't give you the other one, even if you technically may have qualified for it. We used very conservative assumptions throughout the entire study. And this is in the report, again, also as well by county. And these in turn generate substantial ad valorem revenues to the local governments, which we'll talk about a bit more later. Next slide, please. From a fiscal impact standpoint, when we think about fiscal impacts, we're talking about government expenditures on a specific project or a defined scope of work. And then we're looking at governmental revenues that we can link back to that specific project or defined scope of work. And so for the valuation study, if you recall during the in-plan discussion, the in-plan models also generate the estimated tax impacts from all of that economic output. And so based on the in-plan estimates, we have about $146 million in local and state tax revenues generated by this activity, another 185 in federal tax revenues. And in terms of the expenditures, we looked at the CIP outlay. So that was the most consistent way to estimate that. And while those are different every year, on average, that worked out to about $90 million a year for a net fiscal impact of $240 million. So there's a definite positive benefit here. Next slide, please. And then one of the questions was, how are these benefits or impacts distributed throughout the CHNEP area? And to look at this, we took those benefits from the economic impact and the impacts from the hedonic estimates of property values, which recall are not included in the economic impact modeling, and then those fiscal impact benefits. And we looked at those by basin, aggregating those up using GIS, and then compared those to the costs or the government outlays to estimate the net income, or the net impact, sorry, for the distributional analysis. Next slide, please. And what you'll see here and on the next slide are some of the results of that distributional analysis. And it's important to remember that distributional analysis is a relative measure. So none of these are absolute factors. These are compared to each other. So on the left-hand side, what you'll see are the net benefits per capita by basin. And remember, going into this, we really had no idea what this would come out to be. And what we found was that there were no basins that received a negative impact from the expenditures. In all cases, there was a positive benefit per capita, the difference being the range or the spectrum of that benefit. So the lighter values in the map on the left represent values of $5,000 or below per capita, up to the darker values, which are more than $20,000. And if you think about it, this makes sense because the expenditures are made upstream, have benefits upstream, as well as downstream, and then the expenditures downstream, of course, also have benefits there. So there's a cumulative impact that intuitively would concentrate somewhat at the coast. On the right-hand side, this is less intuitive, but very interesting. So in this case, we're looking at net benefits by county, again, per capita using census population. And when you first look at this, you think, well, that doesn't look right because they're so much larger out in the rural inland counties. And that's because we tend to think of this as net income, but we're talking about net benefits from natural resources. And if you look at it that way, this makes a lot of sense because you have a lot of natural resource benefits out there and you have fewer people to have to share them. So on a per capita basis, there are actually larger benefits in some of the rural inland counties in some cases than at the coastal areas that are more crowded. Next slide, please. And then another way to look at this is how is capital investment distributed. And so in this map, what you see, again, lighter colors are lower values and darker colors are higher values. And so here we find that you can see in some of the areas where we've had very concentrated investments show up as concentrated capital investment per capita, again, using census figures anywhere from $5 to $200 per capita. Whereas on the right-hand side, again, when we look at this by county, we have somewhat concentrated areas of investment, but then we're spreading that out amongst a much larger area with fewer people, so that per capita appears diluted, if you will. So again, these are just two ways that you can look at the distribution of those benefits, and there's more information on this in the report as well. Next, please. In addition, we talked about the fact that not all of the benefits from natural resource conservation and preservation can really be estimated with tax impacts and so forth. And so we selected 5 projects as case studies based on the community input in phase 1, and then really looking at how we could represent all of the basins and a spectrum of representative projects, if you will. And we conducted cost benefit analysis across those projects. So we used Charlotte Harbor Flatwoods Initiative, C-43 Reservoir, Gateway to Myakka Marsh, Donna Bay Restoration Phase 2, and South Lake Conning Stormwater Treatment. And we spoke with the engineers that designed these, the land managers, and different folks to really get a good handle on the costs associated with not only bringing these projects forward, but maintaining them for the next 10 years. And then also estimating the benefits over 10 years, which might be avoided costs of TN reduction, cleanup, costs or expenditures by hunters using the lands, and so forth. Next slide, please. And what you see here is on the left-hand side are those restoration costs aggregated across all the projects, and then the green are the benefits from these specific projects. And the benefit cost ratio, which is how many dollars in benefits you receive in exchange for $1 spent, range from about 1.2 up to more than 10 for the Charlotte Harbor Flatwoods Initiative. So that's telling us for every dollar you spend, we're receiving $10 in benefits back to the region. And the average across all of these projects was about $4.80. So for every dollar you're spending on average, we're receiving $4.80 in benefits. And if all of the projects that are scheduled ultimately are implemented, we can expect that another $2.2 billion in benefits will be received over and above the economic impact that we talked about in those early slides. So this is good evidence, and we used, again, very conservative assumptions that these investments are definitely paying off for themselves, and that we're only looking at 10 years, and many of them will have benefits for periods well beyond 10 years. Next slide, please. So within the report, I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it yet, but we have broken down this information for each county. And this is an example of a coastal page, a coastal county page, Lee County. So we break out the economic impacts by the different activities that generate those economic impacts. We talk a little bit about the fiscal investments made in that area and what the return is from those, and then some specifics as to ecological restoration and what happens if the entire habitat restoration needs plan is implemented from an economic output standpoint. Next slide, please. And from an inland county standpoint, we have the same thing. The write-up is a little bit different because the activities will be a little bit different, but those are each broken out as well. Next slide, please. And similarly, we did this breakdown for each basin. So there's a little description at the top about what's the makeup of that basin in terms of the counties and some of the economic activity that's driving benefits within or impacts within that area. And then again, discussion on return on investment of various fiscal impact projects and the habitat restoration needs implementation. Next slide, please. And same for inland basins, similar descriptions. Again, the activities will be slightly different, and so the descriptions are slightly different. But the idea being that we have aggregated these in a way that you can look at a standalone page for your particular basin or county of interest as you're weighing investments and as you're weighing consideration of what's taking place in a particular area to make decisions or to speak with other policymakers about how these decisions have paid off and are expected to continue to pay off. And so we hope you find that helpful. Next slide, please. So in sum, the economic benefits from the activities that you and all of your partners are undertaking accrue throughout the CHNEP area in a substantial way, to the tune of about $13 billion annually. No area receives negative net benefits. In fact, our analysis found that depending on how you slice it and dice it, you receive anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 per person, no matter where you are within the CHNEP area. And there are many streams of economic activity generating this output: tourism, agriculture, the restoration activities themselves. And so you can be confident that based on the analysis that we've completed, it definitely shows that the investments that you have made and will continue to make have paid off in economic terms, and will continue to pay off not only with environmental benefits, but economic output as well for decades to come. Next slide, please. I just want to say that Courtney really poured her heart and soul into this project, and she's taking a well-deserved break right now, so I'm here on her behalf, but we're happy to be here to make this presentation and to share these numbers with you, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the group?
Well, while we're waiting for questions, I just want to first recognize Balmoral Group. They did an awesome job and worked with us closely on getting this report into a format that we think is going to be very usable to our partners. Those fact sheets are really meant to be standalone work products that can be pulled out and used and distributed when you all are meeting with others. So we hope you take advantage of those. We will have hot links on our website that go directly to each of those fact sheets. And we will be distributing this report, the relevant sections, to all of you and your colleagues at the local, state, and federal level. We'll be sending this out. And as Nicole mentioned earlier, we're always happy to do presentations on this as well, but we really want to make sure that this information is utilized. We've invested about $100,000 into this study, a couple years of time, and we're very proud of it. We want to make sure that hopefully you all find value in it and are able to use it in your efforts as well. So please let us know if you have ideas as to how we can make sure this information is utilized. Also today, this is the final report. So we are looking for approval today of this report so that we can move into implementation of distributing it and educating people with it. But with that, I certainly hope that if you have any, we have a valuable opportunity here to having Valerie here. So if you have any questions or comments, this would be a wonderful time to offer those up.
I would just volunteer that I think that that's a phenomenal report. It's very pragmatic and real world. Some of us are in the middle of campaigns. We're always asked about what are we doing to protect the environment, and to see in real dollars your return on your investment is really should suit both sides of the spectrum and all of the citizens that we speak to. It's very sensible, and I intend to print it out and use it on a regular basis. I think it's one of the best reports I've seen.
Great.
That it is. Other comments? Questions?
This is Courtney. Sorry. I wanted to say thank you for this. We are working on a lot of fisheries monitoring and restoration projects, and they're really looking at an economic input now for that. So I'm happy that we'll have something that we can reference. I did have a question, which is a bit late now because this is the final report. I saw that you included commercial fishing and not recreational fishing. Did you touch on charter guides? Is that included in commercial fishing in your analysis, or was that considered recreational? Because I know that's a huge factor in tourism in the Charlotte Harbor area.
No, that's a great question because these are, fine lines in the cutoff. The recreational model actually would pick those up. Can you guys still hear me? I just hit a button accidentally. Okay, sorry. The recreational model actually picks those up. So in terms of funds that people spend to hire a guide to take them out on a charter tour or to take them out on a fishing trip, those are picked up in the industry sectors that estimate the recreational benefits. So it's definitely included.
Wonderful, thank you.
One other
Thank you,
thing
Courtney.
I forgot to mention that I think is important for you all to be aware of is the habitat restoration needs plan that we just talked about. Those fact sheets actually analyze that if the habitat restoration needs plan was fully implemented, what would be the economic return on investment? And those numbers are also included on the fact sheet. So we knitted together this study with the habitat restoration to talk about how implementing that would economically benefit these basins and these counties. You can't see it here. Unfortunately, it's right up below that cutoff. This is like half the fact sheet. It's at the bottom right-hand corner in the fact sheets on the report that you all should have a link to. But also, I was requested a copy of this presentation. I will work with our staff to cut it out and post it on our YouTube channel and on our policy committee webpage. And then you all, by the end of next week, should be able to have it available to access, to review at your leisure. Thank you.